July 9, 1943. Sicily. The British major watched the American transport planes approach through his binoculars and muttered to his aide, "Bloody hell, they're sending coloreds as paratroopers now?" His aide laughed. "Should be entertaining to watch them land, sir." 3 hours later, that major would be eating his words as those same coloreds saved his entire battalion from annihilation. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. The 555 Paratrooper Infantry Battalion, the Triple Nickels they called themselves, wasn't supposed to exist. The U.S. Army had a policy: no black paratroopers. The reasoning was simple, according to the white officers who made such decisions. Jumping out of airplanes required intelligence, courage, and split-second decision-making, qualities that, in their minds, black men simply didn't possess. But there was a problem. As World War II escalated, the Army needed bodies, lots of bodies, and there were thousands of black soldiers demanding combat roles, refusing to accept the Army's insistence that they were only suited for labor battalions and service units. Private Walter Morris from Philadelphia had tried to join the paratroopers 6 times. 6 times he'd been rejected without explanation. On his 7th attempt, he walked past the recruitment office and went straight to the training field. He found a white sergeant conducting PT and simply joined the formation. When the sergeant noticed him, Morris snapped off a perfect salute and said, "Sir, I'm here to train. You can either train me or explain to your commander why you're turning away volunteers in the middle of a war." The sergeant stared at him for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Start with 50 push-ups." Morris did 100. Word spread. More black soldiers started showing up at airborne training facilities, forcing their way into formations, refusing to leave. The Army faced a choice: court-martial dozens of volunteers or admit them to training. Reluctantly, they chose the latter. But acceptance into training didn't mean acceptance. The black paratroopers faced instructors who wanted them to fail, white trainees who refused to train alongside them, and a command structure that viewed their entire existence as a mistake waiting to be proven. Staff Sergeant James Walker from Detroit remembered his first jump. The jumpmaster was this white corporal from Mississippi. Walker said in a 1978 interview, "He looked at me and said, 'Boy, when you jump, you better pull that ripcord fast because I ain't filing paperwork if you become a grease spot.' I looked him dead in the eye and said, 'Don't worry about me, Corporal, worry about keeping up.'" Walker's jump was textbook perfect. He landed within 10 feet of the target zone, assembled his gear, and was standing at attention before the jumpmaster even landed. The corporal never spoke to him again except to bark orders. But Walker noticed something. After that jump, the harassment decreased. Competence, it turned out, was hard to argue with. By 1943, the Army had a small but growing force of black paratroopers. They'd proven themselves in training. They'd exceeded every physical and mental standard. But they still hadn't seen combat. The generals didn't trust them in the field. They were a political experiment, not real soldiers. At least that was the official position. Then came Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. The plan was complex: massive amphibious landings supported by airborne drops to secure key positions inland. Every available paratrooper unit was needed, and when the casualty projections came back higher than expected, someone in command made a decision that shocked the entire European theater. They were sending in the black paratroopers. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes, the white commander of the 555, gathered his men the night before the jump. "Gentlemen," he said, "tomorrow we jump into Sicily. I won't lie to you, there are officers in this army who hope we fail. There are men in our own forces who think we shouldn't be here. But tomorrow we're going to show them all what we already know, that we're the finest paratroopers in this man's army, that the color of our skin has nothing to do with the content of our courage." Private Morris, sitting in the back, whispered to Sergeant Walker, "That's a nice speech, but tomorrow it's just us, the silk, and gravity. Speeches won't slow our fall." Walker grinned. "No, but our training will. And brother, we trained harder than anyone." The jump began at 2 a.m. on July 10, 1943. The transport planes carrying the 555 came in low and fast, taking heavy anti-aircraft fire from German positions. The pilots, mostly white Southerners who'd never flown black troops before, were visibly nervous. "Can these boys even jump in combat?"
one pilot asked his co-pilot. His answer came seconds later, when the green light flashed and every black paratrooper in the plane launched themselves into the darkness without hesitation. Perfect form, perfect timing, not a moment's pause. The co-pilot whistled low. Damn. The night jump into Sicily was chaos. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky. Transport planes were hit, spun, crashed. Paratroopers were scattered across miles of enemy territory. Some units landed 10 miles from their drop zones. Radio communications broke down. The carefully planned operation dissolved into a desperate scramble for survival. Private Morris landed in an olive grove 3 miles north of his target. He was alone. His radio was dead. He had his rifle, 2 grenades, and a map that was rapidly becoming useless. Standard protocol was to find friendly forces and regroup. But as Morris got his bearings, he heard something that changed everything. Machine gun fire, close, and screaming in English. He moved toward the sound and found a scene of carnage. A British infantry company had been ambushed by a German mechanized unit. The Brits were pinned down in a dried riverbed, taking fire from machine gun nests on the high ground. They were badly outnumbered and running out of ammunition. In maybe 20 minutes, they'd be overrun. Morris assessed the situation with the tactical eye his training had drilled into him. The German positions were strong, but their focus was entirely on the Brits in the riverbed. They weren't watching their flanks. Classic mistake. He began moving. Major Richard Pemberton of the British 8th Army was preparing to order a withdrawal when he heard grenades exploding on the German left flank, then rifle fire, precise and controlled, then silence. Then more grenades on the right flank, more rifle fire. "Who the hell is that?" Pemberton demanded. One of the German machine gun nests went silent, then another. Someone was systematically dismantling the German ambush from behind, moving through their positions like a ghost. Private Morris was doing what he'd been trained to do: use terrain, move silently, strike fast, disappear. He'd taken out 2 machine gun positions and was working on the third when he ran into Sergeant Walker, who'd landed half a mile away and heard the same gunfight. "Morris," Walker whispered. "Sergeant," Morris acknowledged. "Glad you could make it to the party." "Wouldn't miss it. What's the situation?" Morris pointed. "Brits pinned in the riverbed, Germans on the high ground. I've cleared 2 positions, 3 more to go." Walker nodded. "Let's work together. You go left, I'll go right. Meet in the middle." They moved like they'd rehearsed it 1,000 times, because they had. Maybe not this exact scenario, but every variation of it. Their white instructors had pushed them twice as hard as other units, trying to find their breaking point. Instead, they'd created the most rigorously trained paratroopers in the Army. The next German physician never saw Walker coming. He moved through the darkness like smoke, his knife doing silent work, 2 guards down before they could raise an alarm. He signaled Morris, who took the machine gun nest with a grenade and 3 precise rifle shots. Major Richard Pemberton watched in amazement as the German ambush collapsed. Whoever was out there in the darkness was conducting a perfect flanking assault. When the last German position fell silent, he ordered his men to push forward and secure the high ground.
That's when he saw them. 2 black American paratroopers standing among the German casualties, reloading their weapons with casual efficiency. Pemberton approached slowly, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You 2 did this?" Morris looked up. "Yes, sure. Private Walter Morris, 555 Parachute Infantry Battalion. This is Staff Sergeant James Walker." "You're—" Pemberton couldn't finish the sentence. He'd been rescued by black soldiers, black paratroopers. It contradicted everything he'd been told about the American military, everything he believed about racial capabilities. Walker watched the major's internal struggle with tired amusement. "Yes, sir," he said. "We're black. We also just saved your men. You're welcome." Pemberton's face reddened. Then, to his credit, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my entire company." News of the incident spread through Allied forces like wildfire. Not officially, the Army made sure of that, but soldier to soldier, in whispers and stories shared over cigarettes and coffee.
the black paratroopers who'd saved a British company, the impossible rescue that wasn't supposed to happen. But that was just the first night. Over the next 3 days, scattered elements of the 555 conducted a campaign of harassment and disruption against German forces that military historians would later call tactically brilliant. Small teams of 2 to 5 paratroopers struck supply lines, communications posts, and isolated units with devastating effect. Corporal Thomas Reed from Chicago led a 3-man team that destroyed a German fuel depot, eliminating enough gasoline to immobilize an entire panzer company for 2 days. Private Leonard Johnson from New York captured a German major and his entire staff, marching them back to Allied lines at gunpoint because, as Johnson later said, "I thought the intelligence boys might want to ask them some questions." The German commanders were baffled. They were facing a new type of enemy, highly mobile, tactically sophisticated, and apparently operating with complete independence. They didn't know these were black troops. They just knew they were effective. SS Hauptsturmführer Klaus Weber wrote in a report intercepted by Allied intelligence, "We are facing elite American commandos. They strike at night with precision and disappear. Morale among our troops is suffering. Request immediate reinforcements." Elite American commandos. The Germans thought the black paratroopers were some kind of special forces unit. The 555 was finally ordered to regroup on day 4. As the scattered teams made their way back to Allied lines, they brought with them captured German soldiers, liberated Allied prisoners, and a reputation that terrified the enemy and confused their own command. When Private Morris's team reported to the Allied command post, the white colonel at the desk looked at them like they were ghosts. "You're from the 555? "Yes, sir," Morris replied. "How many Germans did your team encounter?" Morris thought about it. "Maybe 60, sir. We eliminated or captured 32, evaded the rest." The colonel stared. "And how many men in your team?" "4, sir. Started with 5, but we lost Private Daniels on day 2. Morris's voice caught slightly. Daniels had been his friend from basic training.
"I'm sorry for your loss," the colonel said, and for once he sounded like he meant it. "Your team's actions are being noted for commendation." Morris snapped a salute. "Just doing our job, sir." As they left, the colonel called after them, "Private Morris, I owe you an apology. I didn't think... I was wrong. You and your men are a credit to the uniform." Morris paused. "Sir, with respect, we're not credit to anything except ourselves. We've always been this good. You just weren't paying attention." The Sicily campaign revealed an uncomfortable truth to the Allied command. Black paratroopers weren't just competent, they were exceptional. The 555th had casualty rates lower than comparable white units. They'd completed objectives other units had failed. They'd shown tactical creativity and combat effectiveness that matched or exceeded any airborne forces in the theater. But acknowledgement came slowly and quietly. There were no medals of honor, no newsreel coverage. The stories were filed away, classified, minimized, because the alternative was too dangerous for a segregated army to accept. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who'd commanded the 555th with growing respect and admiration, was offered a promotion to colonel if he'd transfer to an all-white unit. He refused. "These men are the finest soldiers I've ever commanded," he told the general offering the promotion. "I'm not leaving them." The general was not pleased. Hayes never got his Colonel Eagles, but his men never forgot his loyalty. The black paratroopers continued to serve throughout the Italian campaign, always with distinction, always with their achievements downplayed. They jumped into Anzio, into southern France, into missions that should have made them heroes, but instead made them footnotes. Sergeant Walker survived the war. He came home to Detroit in 1945, still wearing his jump wings, expecting parades and recognition. Instead, he couldn't get served at a whites-only diner 2 blocks from his house. "I jumped out of planes to fight Nazis, and I came home to discover we had our own version of fascism right here," he said years later. Private Morris became a lawyer after the war. He spent decades fighting for civil rights,
using the same tactical precision he'd learned in the Paratroopers to dismantle legal segregation. When people asked him about his military service, he always told them, "I learned 3 things jumping out of planes. First, that fear is temporary, but cowardice is permanent. Second, that the ground doesn't care what color you are. It'll break your legs just the same if you land wrong. And third, that the only thing separating capable from incapable is opportunity and training." Major Pemberton, the British officer whose company was saved that first night in Sicily, never forgot. He wrote about it in his memoirs published in 1967. "I was taught that certain peoples were inferior, less capable of courage and tactical thinking. Then 2 black American soldiers saved my life and the lives of 73 British troops. They weren't just competent, they were brilliant. I learned more about prejudice in one night than I had in 30 years of living." The 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion was finally recognized for their service in 2020, 75 years late. The few surviving members received medals and commendations that should have been pinned on their chests in 1945. By then, most of them were gone. Morris had passed in 2003, Walker in 2008, Reed in 1999. They jumped into enemy territory, fighting 2 wars at once, one against fascism abroad, one against racism at home. They won both, even though it took generations to acknowledge it. And somewhere in Sicily, if you know where to look, there's a small olive grove where 2 black paratroopers stood among fallen German soldiers and saved a British company. No monument marks the spot, but the ground remembers, and now perhaps history will too.